Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Maestas, Director of the Collaborative Journalism Resource Hub. Thank you for being here today um, uh, to learn how your collaborative can identify and the impact of your work and how to track it. Um, we know that there are existing frameworks for news organizations to to track their impact, but most of those are designed for individual news organizations. We knew we needed to create a framework for the collaboratives when multiple news and community organizations work together to use, because telling the impact of your work is critical to many success points, including how your work as a collaborative benefits funders and supporters. So last fall, the Hub hired Kari Porter to design this framework. But before we get started with Kari here in this webinar, I want to share some information. If you were not able to attend our 10th annual Collaborative Journalism Summit a couple of weeks ago in Philadelphia, you can read a recap of it at the link that I will drop in the chat here in a minute. That has information about what took place in addition to recordings of the sessions. So you really won't be missing out if you weren't there in person. I'll drop that. And then I just want to tell you that our next monthly webinar will be held Tuesday, June 23rd at noon Eastern. We host these every month on the third or fourth Tuesday of the month, last Tuesday of the month, on different topics. So you can just know that that's to look for topics. Each month, we'll host Nellie Kalu from the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, who will talk about CCIJ's new Election Watch tool, which helps journalists learn practical knowledge on collaborative election monitoring, AI-assisted verification workflows, and newsroom coordination strategies. You can sign up for that on our Eventbrite page soon, and I will also drop that link in the chat here in a minute. So let me introduce Kari. She has worked as a journalist and editor in the US and abroad, and for the past decade has dedicated her work on modernizing business, product, and civil models for news and information. In addition to teaching and presenting regularly, she partners, consults, and publishes with industry stakeholders to innovate in journalism's business and civic models. In her most recent role at the National Trust for Local News, she served as the Director of Impact and Strategic Partnerships. And besides being the impact tracking specialist here with us at the Hub, she currently serves as principal for her consulting agency, Ralston Agency, and she is the Director of Product and Strategic Partnerships for Open Campus. We will record today's webinar, and I will send out the recording and Kari's slides after this is over. At the end of Kari's presentation, there will be time for questions. So if you have one, raise your hand using the Zoom feature or come off mute, and Kari will call on you, or drop it in the chat. I will be watching that and asking those questions. So glad that people are getting here. Let's get started so that we can take up this full hour. Kari.
Thank you so much, Amy. And it's wonderful to see each of you and see your name. So thank you so much for joining. For anyone who is interested, it would be great to hear, for those joining, where you're coming from. If you are leading a collaborative, you're a member of a collaborative, if anyone is up for coming off mute and sharing that context, I think it would be great to hear before I share my screen and get going into the slides. Anyone?
Yeah, hi.
Thanks.
I'm in New Mexico. I'm a member of the Southern New Mexico Journalism Collaborative.
Great, terrific. Welcome to New Mexico. Alex, do you want to see your hand?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. So I am part of the Climate News Task Force. We are 12 news outlets. We're national, international, local, and we are trying to figure out how to, do sustainable reporting, in-depth reporting on climate issues, and continue building collaborations within all the newsrooms in our collaborative, and also working with all the newsrooms that we've already been in the periphery of our ecosystem.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Noelle, I saw you come on. Are you able to just
Sure.
introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I work with the Center for Cooperative Media and I focus on the Civic Science Media initiative. So I am helping to support 10 collaboratives that across the country that involve a news outlet, a scientific organization, and community groups as well.
Terrific. Thank you. And Louise, I see your note in chat. That's great. Wonderful to hear that you're doing research on collaborative journalism. Would love to follow your work, so we'll have to do that. Well, anyone else before I kind of jump into slides and share my screen? Elizabeth?
Yeah, hi. I'm co-chair of Press Forward Northern Michigan, and we provided the founding funds to support a collaborative of it's Bridge, Michigan, Interlochen Public Radio, another dozen newsrooms in our region. So they're doing collaborative work, open source, but we're trying to figure out a way to track the impact. So
Okay, that's great. And Melinda, thank you also. Terrific. Yes, enjoy lunch. This is lunchtime. This is what we should be doing for those of us. I know some of us are on Pacific and Mountain Time, so, mid-morning snack. Okay, well, listen, that's very helpful context, so thank you so much. Alex, I see your hand. Do you have anything else before Nope, you're good. Okay. So, I think that just having those thoughts in mind, I just want to preface or set the table by saying, to build on what Amy mentioned, some of the motivation for working on impact framing specifically for collaboratives is coming from the fact that collaboratives do bring special benefits that we want to think about how those are affecting both the communities that we're serving, but also the participants in the collaborative, the members, the news ecosystem. And then also B, we're mindful that corralling a group of people and organizations it's work. And so we'll get into this in detail when I pull up my slides, but it's neat to hear about the people. Thank you so much for being here today. But I think, this framework is really ideal for the work that you're doing. So without further ado, let me share my slides. Okay, impact training for collaboratives. We've established that. In terms of how we're going to use our time together, I think that the slide portion of this will take about 20-ish, 25 minutes, and we'll have time left over for questions, as Amy mentioned. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the research, how we approached it, then get into the design. This is really what we think of as the frame. And then implementation. So how do we do, how do we build this? And finally, give you an example before we move into Q&A. So a little bit of background is I've had the pleasure of working with Amy and her team through something called the Local Media Project. This was a project I did with a co-author, Elizabeth Hansen Shapiro. We did research from 2020 and 2021. And this was looking at 6 journalism collaboratives around the country. And we focused a lot of our research on the both attitude shifts and behavioral shifts, like what changed in the practice of the journalism making for the collaborative members. And also, I would say we did do some survey and interview analysis with audience members, but the bulk of the findings were centered around how the collaborative as a model itself could affect change for the news in a given region. And one of the ideas we came up with was this concept of collaborative scaffolding. And for those of you who are building collaboratives or actively organizing and leading a collaborative, I imagine you have a sense of what that means almost inherently. When you can build that rapport, that momentum, and that trust, it creates the momentum that allows you to really generate a flywheel for the work that you produce. And one of those, the sum is greater than its parts, like really making that idiom true. So that research, the research that we're looking at now, where we're focusing on working with specific collaboratives that are focused with the hub, that work is building on this. And here, the emphasis we're really focusing on is how do we assess the impact for the communities that we're serving? And that's really the driving focus. So a question that comes up is, how do you define impact? It might seem clear, but for us and for this work, this is how we are approaching it, which is when the community that you've identified that you're serving with your work, when they see concrete benefit. And again, that's a subjective concept. So part of the work of this framework is helping you create contours or shape for how you and your collaborative partners see concrete impact. So this slide kind of says it all in terms of why we want to put our time and energy into this. One thing we talk about a lot is the importance of starting impact tracking at the beginning, if you can, of your work together, because it becomes a foundational layer for how you approach the strategic objectives of your collaborative. And this slide kind of spells it out for 3 different groups. There's impact tracking and the benefits for the members of the collaborative, for the collaborative as an entity itself, and then, of course, for the supporters. As Amy mentioned, how impact tracking can be beneficial when you're communicating your value to funders or potential grantors. So I know you all can read these on the slide, but I want to point out a couple of things for each of them. So with collaborative members, I think that it's almost like a honing device. Impact tracking can be a honing device for making sure that everyone's on the same page about why you're producing this work together and why it's worth participating in versus just continuing to stay on your own path and working independently. And also, I don't think we can miss that impact tracking, as you refine and reflect back on where you're hitting your goals and where you're not hitting your goals, you're setting yourself up for like a built-in refinement system where you can identify opportunities to maybe change course or maybe stay on the same course. But it grounds you in the mission and helps set up that internal decision-making system. So it's valuable, but it also, to go back to that earlier point about collaborative scaffolding, it's a way to ensure that the different members of your team have the buy-in with them. And then, of course, for the collaborative itself, it's a way of understanding why the collaborative's value can why we need it beyond just a handful of different, perhaps news orgs or civic organizations. When they come together, how are we benefiting and being able to raise up those unique characteristics. So we identified 4 questions, and the goal here was to create an impact question that could almost be like a yes/no 4-question set of questions that you could ask and give yourself a pulse for where you are, where the collaborative is on its path to generating that concrete benefit that we talked about. And so, as I mentioned in the very beginning before I started sharing slides, like, we wanted it to be something that you could access easily and use as almost like a pulse check. You know, like when you go to the doctor and they say, we're going to take your vitals. Like, not unlike that, but for a collaborative. And the 4 things we have on here before the questions, the 4 variables: delivery improvement, cross-pollination, essential information, and trust. These are things that we identified as unique characteristics of collaboratives that they together can generate an impact or generate results that would be much harder to achieve if news orgs and or community organizations were trying to go it just solo. So what are these? So delivery improvements. Here we see how when you have different organizations working together and they bring different methods for sharing information or engaging with people, when you work together on that, ideally, you're going to find more creative, new, better, efficient, fill in the blank ways that you are actually getting the information or connecting with people in a way that's improved. Similar concept with cross-pollination, that we know that a lot of orgs come with the audience that they already have, but what does it look like when they can share their reporting or their resources or skills or expertise with audiences that come from different news orgs or from other civic organizations? Essential information this is one where we want to believe that, or not want to believe, but it's true that news orgs and civic orgs can produce essential information living outside of a collaborative. But here, I think we're asking how coming together, like the collaborative can assess like what is needed in a given news environment and how together they're producing information that otherwise doesn't exist. It reflects a strategy. And then finally, are you engendering greater trust in your community? Together, can you provoke, a better rapport with the people that you're attempting to serve or you are serving? And again, I think a collaborative produces a different vantage point for the communities in which it works, because here you have organizations that are collaborating, they're not competing. There's something important about coming together and saying, like, we're attempting to cover issue X because we see this as a need in our given target community. And together we are looking to improve this. So these are the sort of 4 questions, those vitals I was talking about. And so a way in for you to build that frame, when we're talking about, this is like the building of the frame, is these questions. And hopefully, for those on this webinar right now, being able to answer, and can you answer right now, how you would define your target community and the specific audiences within that community. And then when I say 5 indicators showing your collaborative's work, that goes back to these 4. And the reason you said 4 and now you're saying 5. The 5 is the wild card for anything that you think is specific to your collaborative, that is unique and reflective of your collaborative, that you want to measure, that you see as like a value or kind of like an essential component to how your collaborative wants to do its work. So these are the questions. Now I mentioned talking about implementation. So first, you build the frame, whether it's through consensus or by committee or by project manager, but you identify what are those definitions and then what are the things we're trying to measure over time. You establish the indicators. So that looks like saying, how are we going to track this? And I'm going to get to an example in a second. And once you have figured out, you said, like, I'm going to measure event participation over time. And what I'm hoping our goal is that we're going to see X and then see Y. And so what's really fun is you start collecting the data and then you watch it over time. And this is where I was talking about that refinement loop, is you build in opportunities as a group to review and revise and continue onward. Meanwhile, to get to the earlier point about how this affects the people that you're communicating with, your supporters or your potential funders or your current funders, you can be sharing in this work. And what's so neat is like that, the show your work, show don't tell, like this is all part of that. It has the added benefit of being driven in your values and hopefully additive for your work, while at the same time building the case and the story of why the collaborative exists and how it's supporting your community. So this is saying this in kind of a different way, basically, but step by step, you define the terms. And when you work with the hub, we have a diagnostic form and a framework worksheet that we fill out with you and work through with you and kind of define both what we were describing earlier, the community, the audience, how you see concrete impact, the ways that you want to ensure delivery improvements, all down the line. Then, the implementation is where you establish the metrics. And there at the hub, we have a spreadsheet that we build together, and it kind of spells out the stakeholders and gives you sort of meta tags and comes up with ways for you to get into the nitty-gritty of what this actually looks like. And then, like I mentioned, you build in opportunities as a group to review and revise. So just to refresh our memory, these are those 4 questions. And then here's an example. So on the subject of trust, which was that bottom one, number 4, I made this up for the purpose of this, but our collaborative builds relationships through in-person events in and with our target community. So you put that as something that you see as a goal or an aim. And then the implementation, how are we actually measuring how we're accomplishing this? This is our this is how we are building the theory of the case. Is our collaborative holds 1 engagement event per quarter, and each time we see more attendees, some of whom are repeat attendees. So you're thinking about retention or engagement in that way. And then the workflow is that how do you actually measure this? Is that in this case, if you're having people show up through Eventbrite, you would be able to go back and review and see what are your numbers, how many people are actually showing up. There's going to be some in-person auditing that has to happen, but then, what does it look like in terms of people returning, if that's a thing that you see as an example of engagement and trust building. Some factors to consider. So group buy-in is obviously essential. You want your team and the members of your collaborative to see this as an important instrument for staying true to the initial goals of the collaborative. And so however you do that is going to reflect the culture of your collaborative. But, we could see it as being kind of like a dashboard. It could take place at like the top of if you have like a regular meeting, or maybe it's a quarterly check-in. You can have someone designated as you could have subcommittee and have people report out on that. It depends on how your collaborative works, but figuring out a way to both have the buy-in, and then this leads to the next part of division of labor, a way for this not to be just like a cumbersome thing, like building a massive weighty machine or instrument that you have to hold up somehow. But like, what does it look like to have the right energy approach to it? I think thought goes into who does what. And in some cases, it might make sense to have a project manager manage it entirely. And in other cases, it's possible that you can delegate depending on how you approach the design itself, which then leads to the design feasibility point. So here, something that comes up a lot is like, how do we know how many people we're reaching? And how do we know if those people are in the community that we're serving? And it's just the metrics we have for this are different than they were when we were relying on things like household penetration rates for newspapers. So I'm seeing different ways, and I think it reflects the trust in different collaboratives and what members are willing or can share, because different org members bring different capacity in that way. But we have, like, one way I've seen it work is if you do want to get a handle on something like audience reach, but you're not going to be able to pull the unique views for every story from every outlet or something like that. If you can identify, it really becomes an issue of scope, where you say, okay, we are all producing, or we're all on this subject matter, we're focusing, we have this one story coming out this month. And if you can say, what does it look like to get unique views for 1 week during the week that this is published, or, but you essentially you etch out the terms and make them as feasible as possible for the members to participate and build it that way. But the other thing I would say is, like, because there's a lot of room for this sandbox is big and you can explore and define and build in different ways, you make something that's achievable. So, it depends on your collaborative, but ideally, like, you're not going to set a bar that isn't really possible, whether that means it's very challenging to get metrics, or whether it means like you're trying to, reach something that is not really accessible. Like, you want things to be like these goals to be attainable so that you can work towards them and use them as healthy benchmarks. And finally, I just want to make a point about both qualitative and quantitative impacts here. So the way that we have designed this framework, there's room for all of one or all of the other or both. I think our hope would be that it would be a mix, and that in showing the impacts of the collaborative, you can bring in those testimonials that are important, and at the same time be able to show some quantitative reach. Which I think that's part of what we're getting at when we talk about delivery improvements. Like, we are saying, like, can we reach our audiences in improved ways through the collaborative? And so thinking really strategically about what that means and then how you would measure that does have some quantitative underlying, basis to it. But I think that it's designed to be flexible depending on your capacity. So I think, and then last, so here's my name. This is my email. You should not hesitate to write to me if you have questions or you want to talk. But I would like to leave it up for questions. I'm going to stop sharing. And see if, I would be delighted if anyone has like specific questions that they're making sense of for their own collaborative. I'd be delighted to kind of talk through that. Or if we want to discuss the framework in greater detail, take questions on that as well.
Yeah, please feel free to come off mute and ask questions. Kari, questions about your specific environment and what you're working with or your collaborative to see. It's a smaller group, so we thought we could give a little bit more tailored information and guidance around this. So please feel free if you feel comfortable.
Okay, I'm jumping in. Can you tell me, as far as the resources that you have to offer, how do we access them? What do we do? This is my first time, so I'm a newbie. How does this work?
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit. I wonder, did we work together through Word and Black?
Long time ago, yeah.
Yeah.
So, as a result, when I saw your name, I was like, "Oh, I wonder what's she doing now?" Okay, let me find out that kind of thing. So, yeah. So, what I'm trying to understand is this a resource that if we have a collaboration that's coming up, then you can work with us in giving us best practices and things of that nature? Or how does this work?
Absolutely. So Amy is probably the best suited to discuss the hub and how the hub works, but
Okay.
I'm first going to talk about what I just presented on how. So the framework is intended to be shared. The slides will be put up online, and the intent is that you can use those. And so, for instance, like those four main principles, and using those as the heuristics, and then identifying like the ways you'd actually measure them, all of that is there to crib. And I think we want to be supportive and helpful. So in so much as like when you have questions and things like that, I am happy to talk through them. And even here now, like so I
So
would
if the program that we're doing, and I'm just going to go straight to the chest, is
yes,
we're doing a collaboration with creators. And
great.
so as a result of that, we've gotten a little bit of grant money to be able to do that. Um, I'm old school. And so I'm learning how creators think and how they approach journalism. And it's old school versus new school. And so I want to implement the best practices, but I also don't want to sacrifice credibility. And so, you got this, hey, young people, hi, it's no longer give me five or any of that. It's something else now. So it's like, okay, how do I build this in a way where it is a win-win for both of us?
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, Sunny, those are the right questions. I
I don't
think,
want to jam up your session, so that's why I was asking, do we sign up for some
yeah.
consulting or
Well, I
counseling?
think let's take a little bit of time on it now. Amy,
Okay.
does that sound right to you? Because we've
Yeah, we can do a little bit of that work, and then Sunny,
Mhm.
let's talk, and we can see how we can interact with the hub and Carrie and help where you are
Yeah, I need help. Okay.
okay, okay.
But I think off the cuff,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the creators that you're working with, being able to sit down and use those four things. So like I would think that, again, I'm riffing here, but like
That's okay.
on the subject of like how delivery improvements and cross-pollination, like the creators are going to bring ideas and perspective that I would imagine the news organizations would really welcome and benefit from. So thinking expansively about how you can ensure the news coverage that's being reported is going through those newer channels would be an example of that impact, where you're going to see a different type of engagement and a different kind of audience reach. And then on the other hand, to the point you were sharing about just how are we make sure, like you didn't really use this word, but what came to mind was almost like quality control.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, I think that would be an interesting approach to the variable of trust. So saying, you know, what are some ways? And so when you meet with your collaborative group, saying like, trust is something how do we build trust and having that conversation and, like building consensus as a group on trust looks like X or Y or Z. And, it could be something like we, um, we present information that has been, fact checked or has an editor go through or whatever that is. But it's a way to engage what you're describing as like some of the things that the news organization is bringing that is distinct to the news organization and valuable and you don't want to lose. And at the same time, bring in the practices and also the distinct valuable contributions that the creators are bringing. So it's like a way for you to highlight the strengths of each and also develop like not exactly I think not the same as like a North Star, but those
Kind of like that. Mm-hmm.
yeah, those I think like vitals feels like a good way of understanding it for me, just like how we are like on track, like we're keeping steady on certain standards while also making these reaches. I think that's how you could use the impact framework to move together on shared value, like on shared goals, but still benefiting from the different attributes that the group members are bringing.
For no other reason, you gave me some good terminology to use throughout the process
Good.
to build a foundation, everything from cross-pollination to trust, to the shared goals, the strength of each, the value that we both bring to the table, yet keeping some standards. So thank
Yeah.
you. All right.
Absolutely. Tony, thank you so much for sharing. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you again. And the one other thing I'll mention is that I mentioned this too at the top, but like the sooner you can do some of this work, the more embedded it is in the culture that you're building. And it's just and like the part of me that really loves setting and running experiments, like the more data you build, and all of that is a story. Like when you are talking to your community or when you're talking to supporters, but like that is part of the work that we're all trying to do, is figuring out how do we do our work better, right? And so it's not only the end goal of saying like, oh my gosh, we reached X, Y, and Z, but it's also saying like we this is like a version of like in our constitution, right? Like this is how we are like um orienting the work.
Thanks for that, Kari. I will drop the hub, just very quickly for those of you who may not know, is an extension of the work that we did at the staff of the hub did at Solutions Journalism Network, where we were running the local media project for 5 years to create night funded to create 15 collaboratives to strengthen local media ecosystems. And we had tremendous success with the local media project. And so the work that we do at the hub is continuing to help convene local journalism collaboratives. Part of that is particularly because the hub is also funded by the Knight Foundation. The Knight wants to see what kind of impact are these organizations working together having on their communities, whether you're working in a local media ecosystem or whether you're national or transversal, if you're working around a subject, working together, if it's climate or housing or something like that. But we wanted to create this framework because, as I said at the top of this webinar, there are frameworks for a singular organization to understand the impact of their work, which is very common in our industry now, talking about impact tracking. Impact Architects has an excellent tool. There are others, but that exist, but there's not been until now one for tracking for multiple organizations working together, because you need to take that impact back to funders, put it in your reports, put it in grant applications, and being able to also tell your communities, your audiences, and those people you serve why the work you're doing is important and the kind of impact you're having, which is beyond just did we get a law, was a law change as a result? Did we get a mention here? Like how are we being, how is our work landing and being impactful? So this is why this framework looks at multiple organizations working together as opposed to just an individual news organization. I'm going to drop in the chat a link to a guide that we wrote when we ran the local media project at SJN that also helps us. This is a beginning of this conversation. We have built on this, but it probably is useful to getting a North Star impact. Yes, Sunny, I will reach out to you and we can set up a time to talk too. Alex has a question about when you're building a public-facing website for the Climate News Task Force, what are some must-haves? What level of detail would you recommend put to describe impact on website? Kari, do you feel you have that answer to that? Okay.
I'd be happy to. And then also, I did see that Sunny asked for your email, Amy, too. If you want to drop that in the chat. Okay, Alex, I was thinking of you because I think a question that comes to mind immediately for me around trust is the perception, at least I have, around climate news and audience burnout and on the subject. And so, like, I think it's just it's such an important subject. And how do you think about the ways that the work you're producing is engaging the communities such that they see concrete benefit? Like that's a really important, substantive meaty question. Maybe meaty is not the best word, but I want to see if I can answer your question straight on. So, must-haves, level of detail describing impact on your website. The first thing is who your audience is, right? For everything. Like we all kind of know to think in that way. But like I think it depends on who your audience is for. Is it for other news orgs or civic orgs that you want to partner with? Is it kind of a general website that you're using to share your news that you want people to reach to access the stories that are or the news or information that's being produced? Is it specifically or more for supporters that you're trying to reach funders or people who would be interested in kind of like joining in and kind of like a movement? And so I mean, I would start with that question. Do you feel up for giving me a thought on that in this context? Or
Yeah, I'm happy to give some context. So we're still building the website. We're in the very beginning stages. A good number of us mentoring SCJ, which was a couple months ago, and the first thing we figured out was, well, there are 12 news outlets and we all define impact very differently from one another, right? So the
yeah,
first thing we realized we got to do is to first like, okay, you got to have some kind of baseline to define some common words when we want to measure impact.
yeah,
And I feel like that's going to be part of the website, as in like, okay, how would you define reach, for example, right? How would you define other things? I would say, at this point, the website would be helpful not just for news outlets, but also for potential funders. Unfortunately, we've been running into an issue where funders have been more, let's put it in this way, like they've been more stingy and scared since Trump went back into the White House, and they, like it feels like they want evidence for everything that works without understanding that journalism is a public good, and but it's fine, if they want to play that game, we'll do it. And I think that's why we want to tell people about why 12 news outlets can do more than the sum of their parts, and why this is so important to not just people's health or the planet's health, but also for like democracy as a whole, that this kind of work needs to be done. And I feel like that's kind of the case where obviously there's always a problem where not just mention burnout, but the part about, well, some people just tune it out, or they're just some audiences that we just can't reach because we're not willing to lie to our audiences in order to get an extra slice of people. But hey, at least we could make the case to donors or make the case to other partners that we want to work with about why we should exist. Also being mindful that like probably some kind of administrate, like some people from the administration is monitoring us, so we're trying to navigate this. And yeah, so very broadly, that's sort of what we're looking at. Like first define like what we think impact is when it comes to climate journalism, why we think this is an impact, um and then laying it down in some kind of detail, but not too much detail, in a way that like somebody who's new to us but are interested in our work, they're not like trying to get being against us or find something to like yell at us or to like make an expose out of us, to understand and get them to support us either through working with us or funding us, kind of thing. That's a very long answer for a very
no,
short
no,
question.
it's it's a good answer. And you, in a way, you kind of answered some of your question is in there, right? Like some of the answers you talked about um, defining the impact. So um, how that the different participating organizations may have a different way of thinking of impact, but defining impact for the organization. So that sounds off like right away. That sounds like a valuable thing to have on your website. And then another thing that you mentioned that really stood out to me was when you talked about the sum being greater than its parts. And so if you have examples of that that probably, the show don't tell thing, like that is probably um, something that will convey quickly to a newer audience that's getting a handle on what collaboratives are and how they can be valuable. Like that stood out when you were talking. And then the last thing I'd say, which like we all know, but a website is, it's a front door. It's a communications vehicle. So what you put on your website may be more broad strokes, to your point, for what that audience needs versus the nitty-gritty detail that, like for instance, implementation, like all of that goes into that part of the work might not be appropriate for your website simply because it's not, it's about who your audience is. Those are just a couple thoughts, but it sounds like when you were answering the question, you had a lot of good stuff in there. So you probably, in some ways, have it pretty figured out.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I'm glad you're walking us through this. And I feel like, yeah, because showing impact is it's kind of tough. I feel like just like what's the right amount to show and what's the right kind to show. And I feel like we're gonna have a meeting straight after this, and we're gonna try to discuss it. But this has been helpful. I feel I really appreciate like the four benchmarks and the wild card. I think that's something I can bring to the group and discuss like how we can like frame this in our context.
Good. Yeah, good, terrific. It's designed to be hopefully something that is accessible. Like we all have a lot, I know. So it's hopefully something that is actionable. But thank you, Alex, and I'm excited to follow your work. Does anyone else have any other questions or things that we want to cover? We have a couple more minutes.
If we don't have questions, we can wrap it up, but I will be sending Kari's slides to everyone after this, and Kari's contact information, my contact information, if you have additional questions about collaborative work and particularly around impact, and feedback. If you take this framework and implement it in your environments and have feedback for it, we would love to hear this. As I said earlier, this is a new framework. Kari presented it at the Collaborative Journalism Summit. You can, if you would like, you can read up about that. The link in the chat that where is a recap of the summit, and ask us questions or tell us what you find maybe missing or maybe some more context for your individual news organizations. But I think that using the questions and the framework to guide you through your own discussions are really good in Kari's slide. So thank you for everyone for coming out.
Thank you so much. It's been such a treat to get to have this time with each of you. So thank you.